Hi, everybody. Welcome to CBN's special coronavirus coverage. I'm medical reporter Lori Johnson. Today, best-selling author Dr. David Perlmutter is answering your questions about coronavirus. Welcome, Dr. Perlmutter.
Hello, Lori. Always great to talk to you.
Well, you are a trusted voice in the medical field. Our viewers know you from your many appearances on CBN and look to you for guidance. Folks are trying to figure out how to manage this health crisis, right?
It's true. I mean, we are clearly in uncharted territory, and we have to build on what we know from past experience. We have not ever in our lifetimes experienced anything like this, and we have to keep our ears open and learn what we can and make good decisions.
Well, let's get to the questions. Diane wants to know, do they know positively how long a person needs to be quarantined if they have been exposed to the coronavirus?
And this is one of the most fundamental questions that anyone could ask because, you know, somebody wants to write it out in your home. How safe is it? Do they have the problem? Can they transmit it? The average incubation time, in other words, the time when you're infected till you begin to show symptoms, is about 5.5 days, which means if you wait 5.5 days, half the people will show symptoms, but the other half won't. If you really want to be very circumspect, it is truly the 14-day period. That's north of 95% certainty that you'll be able to identify who does and who doesn't manifest the disease. The problem, however, is that some people can have coronavirus and have no symptoms whatsoever and possibly still be contagious. So, you know, the idea of having somebody stay at your house, great. But you need to probably stay away from that person, have them in their own room and going through all the motions for at least 14 days.
Mary emailed us and asks, if you get the coronavirus, how long do you have it? 1 or 2 weeks, perhaps?
These are excellent questions. And I would say to Mary, we don't have the answer yet. We know that it can be as long as 6 weeks. And further, we don't know if that person is then immune to getting infected once again. Like, you know, we used to almost insist that children get chickenpox because once they had it, it was a done deal. We don't know that to be the case right now as it relates to this virus in particular. There is a sense in looking at the literature that perhaps the second time around, it may not be as intense, and but we're looking at that.
Dr. Perlmutter, Aster has a question. If I have thyroid problems and I had a headache for 1 week, can it be coronavirus?
Well, headache is one of the symptoms of coronavirus. I would say an individual who normally does not get a headache and now suddenly has a headache, whether they have thyroid disease or not, it is something to think about. I think next step would be to take your temperature. Anything north of 100.5 would be something to think about in terms of the possibility that that may explain what's going on. But, you know, people are certainly welcome to get anything else as well, like the common cold, like the flu at this time. But you certainly have to be very suspicious with things like headache, with things like a deep and productive cough, and even gastrointestinal symptoms, which are not really typical of the typical flu.
Amanda emailed this question. How does the coronavirus affect infants?
Well, interestingly, there have been no reported deaths that I'm aware of with respect to infants. So there's something about a very young immune system here in America, something about a young immune system that is highly protective. That doesn't bode well for the rest of us. The older you get, the greater is your risk. You know, the risk of being 80 or greater of dying from this coronavirus is not insignificant. It's certainly north of 10%. But if you have underlying medical conditions, that can certainly make the situation worse. By the way, what the literature has now recognized is that the biggest threat to surviving this in terms of underlying illness is cardiovascular disease. Followed by other things like underlying pulmonary or lung disease, and certainly diabetes mellitus type 2. Diabetes type 2 is a risk factor for having an increased likelihood of having a bad outcome from this infection.
Kathleen wants to know, how is this different than the flu? Why this craziness over this coronavirus if the flu is deadlier?
Well, with all due respect, the flu is nowhere near as deadly as the coronavirus by any stretch of the imagination. I wish that this were like the flu, then there wouldn't be basically closing down of our country and the world as you look around. It turns out that the lethality of this virus is anywhere between 10 and 20 times worse than getting the flu. And the most recent evidence is indicating that it isn't just as infectious or contagious as the flu, it's more contagious than the flu. So moving forward, the CDC is predicting far more individuals being affected by this with, unfortunately, a higher death rate.